Hello, my name is Dustin Anderson, and today we're going to be talking about construction and the cloud, building a future with real-time data. We do have a lot of content today, so if you could actually go ahead and ask any questions you have in the chat forum. Hopefully we'll have time to get to those at the end, but if not, we will certainly follow up with you via email with responses to your questions. Thanks so much for joining us today. So we have a couple of special guests with us today, Chris Langiza from Procore and Dennis Stacekel from Sage. What I love about this is both of these gentlemen are really focused on customer success, finding tools and partnerships and ways to make our customers even more successful. So we're going to go ahead and jump right on into this. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. And Chris, I'm actually going to start with you. Procore has really evolved over the years, and your keen focus on data seems to be one of those driving forces.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And our industry really needs to be focused more on data. What you'll understand from folks who've been in the construction industry is that we have traditionally been an analog industry. You can see from McKinsey's and Company's report at the bottom of this chart that construction was really near the bottom as far as industries that have been digitized, really only ahead of agriculture and hunting and fishing. And if you know much about agriculture, we have hunters and fishermen to thank for not being dead last. And what that has resulted in is a lack of productivity gains over the last 20 to 50 years. And in addition to that, a significant amount of rework, over $500 billion plus, that is resulting from poor data, poor communication on the job site because we don't have good data. And by being able to improve our processes and being able to capture more data from the field and really drive insights, that's where we can make a significant change in our industry. Now, as we take a look at how our industry has evolved and the way that we build has evolved over the last 20 years, you'll understand that we come from a place of analog, paper, pens, file folders that we color-coded to make sure that we had a lot of information in the right place. But over the last 10 to 15 years, we've really seen a move towards digital, right? The introduction of the internet, mobile devices, capturing more information from the field, capturing that information digitally. But we still weren't leveraging as much of that information as we could because we weren't able to drive true insights out of it. We didn't have enough of the data to drive those insights. So now we're turning and focusing on how do we drive insights and metrics for our industry to make better decisions upon and to really change the way that we run our businesses moving forward. And this is really important to how we're going to change the industry and change construction from here on out.
No, I completely agree with you, Chris. Those are great points. And Dennis, you and I have talked quite a bit about a similar evolution in the role of the construction financial manager or the CFO.
Similar to the way Chris talked about how technology has resulted in evolution within construction, we have also seen a change in the role of the construction financial manager. As computing has moved from analog to predictive, we are seeing the role of the CFM move from historian of financial data to a financial visionary. This evolution is helping construction companies adopt and consume this ever-changing technology. As a result of data technology or data silos, a construction financial manager is limited. We see the CFM able to determine what has occurred. For example, the CFM can determine that a job is under build, but due to a lack of visibility into all of the project data, the CFM might not be able to determine why. This is CFM 1.0. As a contractor implements more modern technology, removing data silos, the CFM can use real-time data and dashboards to provide the support and analysis needed to help our business improve operational and financial performance. You add the why to what happened, helping the organizations use data to gain strategic insights. For example, why are we underbilled? The CFM can gain visibility into change orders and might determine that a particular project manager is not getting the change orders signed, resulting in cost, but the inability to bill it. This is CFM 2.0. So now that we know why, What can we do to prevent, influence, or change future actions? You use your data and emerging technology to create a vision of the future of the business. Instead of using a rearview mirror, you are using data and predictive analytics to look ahead and plot new direction. We are entering a new era where artificial intelligence and machine learning brings us to a new phase of finance. Sage is exploring the use of AI to monitor for transaction outliers. The system could learn that for a particular cost code, a specific vendor or vendor type is typically used. If the system sees that an outlier vendor is used, a warning could occur. This is CFMM 3.0.
Thanks, Dennis. I really like those concrete examples. It helps us kind of understand that evolution. So, Chris, I'm going back to you. How about an example of data-driven analysis with something that we are all way too close to, COVID-19? What has Procore done on this front?
Well, absolutely. We were excited to share some of the information and data that we've collected around the construction activity throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. What's really important to understand is that our customers were really asking us to provide additional insight into what was happening inside of our industry. How were businesses being affected, which businesses were being affected, and in a lot of cases, how are we recovering? So we wanted to make that data available to not just our customers, but also to the industry. So we're going to go ahead and review a few different things here. The first thing we're going to talk about is the shelter-in-place timeline. When different states and areas of the country decided to shelter in place and how that affected construction. That'll be important to understand because you'll see how it affects the number of worker hours that show up on a job site. We'll then dive into those worker hours and how it was affected on a national level, then break it down by state, and then start to take a look at some of the business sizes and how different business sizes were affected by the pandemic. Then we'll dive one step deeper into infrastructure and understanding how it was that different types of projects, whether they be infrastructure projects or non-infrastructure projects, were affected. And then lastly, dive a little bit more into the major metropolitan areas and compare those throughout the timeline of the pandemic as well. So let's take a look at the COVID-19 shelter-in-place timing. So the United States went into COVID shelter-in-place in really 4 different cohorts. It started the earliest in the weeks of March 15th with California, Illinois, and New Jersey, and then proceeded week over week with different portions of the country, as you can see them colorized here, going into shelter-in-place orders. And even some of those parts of the country, some states that had either no or minimal statewide orders for shelter-in-place. Now, keep this in mind as we look at the next chart, which is going to show us the worker hours, and you're going to see how these shelter-in-place cohorts affected the week-over-week changes in those worker hours. So what we'll explore here is a chart that will show how the worker hours that were measured on a job site, as they are collected through daily logs filled in by our customers and also all of the collaborators such as owners, GCs, and specialty contractors that are on that job site, were measured on a week-to-week basis. You'll notice that the week of March 1st, right before we started to realize some of the effects of COVID in the United States, that we were at about a 14 million worker hour representation. That represents about 400,000 workers across hundreds of thousand job sites in the United States. Now, that first week of March 8th, we start to realize some of the effects, and then we see that first shelter-in-place order go in place on the week of March 15th. We start to see a steady decline all the way through the week of April 5th, which was the last shelter-in-place order, and that was also our low point. Now, that represented a decline of about 17% of worker hours over the pre-COVID high. Now, that was a pretty big punch to the gut, but it was by no means a knockout punch to construction, because following that week, the week of April 12th, when we started to see some of the payment protection program payments come out, we started to see a bit of a recovery. Then we start to see around the week of April 26th, where we see some of those earliest openings where they've relaxed what projects can continue to go forward and started to put more non-essential construction projects back to work. We continue to see that increase. All the way through the week of May 10th, where we realized that we were actually above the pre-COVID high at 14.2 million worker hours. Now, we do see a short decline for the week after and the following week due to the Memorial Day holiday. A lot of people take that day off, and some of them will go ahead and get out of town early on Friday, so that definitely had some effects on project worker hours as well. But coming back strong the week of May 31st and June 7th, we're seeing that those worker hours are being measured at about 14.7, 14.6 million, which is a 5% increase over where it was pre-COVID. Now keep in mind, none of these numbers are corrected for seasonal increases, meaning that this is prime construction time for most parts of the country where a lot of projects will be getting started. So there is an expected increase in the number of worker hours that's going to happen on projects during this time anyways. We aren't taking that into account. These are direct numbers that are coming from our customers and from the projects that they're managing on their job sites. So we didn't want to actually stop there though. We wanted to start to take a look at some of those projects and how it was affected by a state-by-state level. Some parts of the country were much more heavily affected than others. So let's dive into the U.S. and dive into some of those states on the next slide. Now, as we take a look at this first map, you'll notice that this is the week of March 8th. It's showing really the first week that we are starting to see some of the effects across the United States of COVID. You will see that California is already starting to see a decline in the number of worker hours that they're realizing on projects. Now, as we start to step through some of these maps, you'll see how different parts of the country, based on when they sheltered in place and based on how their restrictions were put in place on construction, were affected. Now, this next week, the week of March 15th, you'll notice that this was the week that California went shelter in place. They're already down 26%. It wasn't that until the following week that California started to ease some of the restrictions that were happening in construction and deemed some of that work to be essential. Now, the following week, the week of March 22nd, is when some of the hot spots started to show up in the country. This was the areas of Seattle, in Washington, and much of the Northeast, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania. You'll notice that as we progress through each one of these maps, that those hotspots continue to see some of the biggest reductions in worker hours throughout this entire time period. As low as you'll see here, Pennsylvania being represented at almost 80% below its pre-COVID high. As we progress a little bit later into April, you'll notice that this is once some of the work is coming back into place. We have started to ease some of those restrictions, and now we're starting to take a look at how are people going to return to work. So you'll start to see at this point in time that areas in the South, Texas, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, have already almost returned to pre-COVID highs. Now, you'll also see that areas in the upper Midwest are starting to realize that they're representing that they are getting into their construction season as well, because they didn't have the restrictions that some of the other states had, and they're already above and beyond some of their pre-COVID rates. Now, as we progress into May, we're starting to realize that more and more parts of the country are starting to recover. We're starting to see places like Pennsylvania actually come all the way up from minus 80% all the way up to minus 7%. Now, New York still heavily affected. Massachusetts, they were some of the last to raise their restrictions on construction, but more and more of the country is starting to recover at this given point in time. Now, by the week of May 10th, you can see also a very strong story that we're starting to close the gap. Either most of the states, around 30 of them at this point, have returned to either just below pre-COVID highs or just above those pre-COVID highs, making it so that a majority of the workers in the United States were returning back to work on projects because restrictions were being released. Now, as we progress into the week of May 17th, you're starting to see more and more of the country turn blue. Now, still have those hot spots up in New York and Massachusetts, in that part of the country that are still feeling the effects. They have not returned back to work. They have not released the restrictions on non-essential types of construction, so that is still affecting projects and companies in those areas. But you will realize that even some of the other hotspots, like in Seattle, are at about 3% above where they were pre-COVID high. Texas, 7% where they were pre-COVID high. Georgia is 27% above that pre-COVID high, because they are likely trying to make up some of the time that they lost during the COVID delays. As you can see, we have a quick drop again due to that week of Memorial Day where we had that short week. Then moving on to that last week of May and that first week of June, where we're seeing that 34 states now are above where they were previous to COVID. And we're still only really seeing a few states, West Virginia and New York, that are really significantly below. Now, this is because New York still at this point had not reopened the construction. And now as we move into the week of June 7th, this was the first week that New York City had reopened construction projects for non-essential project types. So you can see that they jumped all the way up to -9%. It's still going to take another week or so, but I guarantee you they're going to get to above those pre-COVID numbers. Similarly, the rest of the country is still continuing to grow. We're seeing significant increases in worker hours, and our data continues to tell us this story, that we're seeing more and more growth in the number of workers that are showing up back to work on job sites, and that projects are progressing forward. Now, we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the data and see how our customers were being affected. We wanted to understand, did small businesses feel more of an impact than medium or large businesses? And everyone anecdotally believed that small businesses were going to be much more heavily affected than medium or large size businesses, but we wanted to have the data to back it up. So we took a look at this chart, which showed us that, as we expected, small businesses were significantly more impacted than medium or large businesses, especially early on. Now, they have significantly closed that gap and still returned to above pre-COVID highs at this point, but they still haven't recovered to the areas that medium and large businesses have. You'll also notice that medium businesses did take a little bit more of a hit early on than large businesses, but they did close that gap, and even really at this point they're pretty much running neck and neck or a little bit above those large businesses. It just took them a little bit longer to put in place the policies, the procedures, and the ways for them to work safely on those job sites than maybe some of those larger customers. Now, the other thing that we had heard from the industry was they felt that infrastructure type projects might be a bit more resilient than non-infrastructure type projects. And this was because of spending that potentially was going to happen, or types of projects that had to press on even though there was COVID concerns. We did, however, want to dive one level deeper. We want to understand maybe there was a type of infrastructure project that was more relevant than others. So we started to split projects into things like transportation and healthcare and energy and compare those against non-infrastructure projects. And what was really interesting is early on, healthcare projects were definitely holding closer to the line. They were staying close to as active as they were before. And a big piece of this was because many of our customers were participating in those COVID conversion projects. They were providing labor to go ahead and convert places like convention centers and arenas into hospitals to be able to take on the additional beds that healthcare providers may need. Now, later on into this cycle, they're still hanging on around that zero line, but we've seen the recovery of transportation and energy right up to about the same levels as those non-infrastructure type projects as well. Now, lastly, we got asked by a lot of folks to really truly understand their local area. their metropolitan, what's happening in New York, what's happening in LA, what's happening in Dallas. So we picked 10 of the largest metropolitan areas to go ahead and take a look at. You'll see that we picked Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, San Francisco, and Seattle from some of the largest metropolitan areas across the country. And as you can see, New York, San Francisco, and Seattle all were heavily, heavily impacted very early on. But Dallas, for example, really only dipped below the pre-COVID line a couple of times. For the most part, they continued to see growth in their worker hours throughout the entire time of the pandemic. Similarly, Miami recovered very, very quickly, with the exception of the week of Memorial Day. That was one of the weeks that they took a hit, but that was because of the short week. But New York is really the one that is lasting the longest, and the impacts are being felt the longest as far as workers not being back on the job site yet.
It's absolutely fascinating data to me, Chris. I love how you guys kind of focused in on a single data element, worker hours, and looked at how that changed over time, and then used kind of different segments or approaches to look at geography and even type of construction. Really fascinating, great work by the Procore team.
Well, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. And we really wanted to provide that type of data and information to the industry. The unfortunate part is that about 95% of all the data that gets captured in construction and engineering in our industry goes unused. There's a huge potential to start leveraging that data to provide more insights so that we can drive better decisions for our businesses. And one of the biggest reasons that that data goes unused is because it's siloed. Now, one of the most common ways that those silos show up on projects or within companies and for that data is because the technology that is used by the different stakeholders on those projects is keeping the data siloed between those stakeholders. They're each using different solutions. They're each using different tools, and therefore we can't share that data across our companies. We can't share that data across our users. And this isn't just a problem for the individual stakeholders, but it's also problems for internally for a lot of our companies as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. The silos have always been something construction has battled. And Dennis, what does that look like beyond the project team?
Chris talked about data silos amongst project team members, but they exist within the walls of your organization. If these data silos exist in your organization, they can and will lead to inefficiencies, bad uninformed decisions, and will impact your bottom line. For example, if your service system is not connected to your accounting billing platform, you will experience delays in billing. If your estimating system is not connected to your accounting system, you can't compare actuals to estimates. Are you on track with your spend? Who knows? If your business development group can't look at historical project data by data points like region, owner, project type, you might not be able to answer what project should you continue to bid on. Operation needs to push and pull data quickly and easily from your accounting system. You do not want to rekey subcontracts, POs, change orders, which are often generated by your operations team. You do not want actual labor costs to lag back to your superintendents for accurate productivity analysis. With Procore Sage integration, we address these data silos. Data is captured a single time and then shared with other systems departments. Committed cost and change management data flow directly to the system of record, the ERP system, while actual cost values from the accounting system of record flow seamlessly into the hands of the operations teams using Procore.
So Chris, we'll spin back to you. What are some of the pain points that are caused by these silos?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dennis talked about it with the time spent for double entry, but it's more than that. It leads to poor communication and collaboration and frustration and friction between those team members. It also can lead to costly rework and safety risks. Not having the right information in the right people's hands in the right system can cause people to make decisions and have to redo work later on in the project. That has a significant effect on our productivity, especially anytime you have to do work twice. And then lastly, let's be honest. I mean, people want to work in systems that are easy to use, that they don't feel like they have to enter something 2, 3, 4 times. So the fact that these silos exist oftentimes has an effect on employee attraction and employee retention.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you guys have said. And so let's make that transition, right? What are our companies doing to help? And Dennis, you touched on this on the previous slide, but can you walk us through this partnership? Pause.
Procore and Sage deliver technology solutions to tens of thousands of contractors. These integrations have been built to address many of the challenges we have talked about earlier. Through years of working together, we have seen thousands of organizations use our integration to improve their businesses. Integration to our industry-leading Sage 300 construction and real estate has been in the market for over 4 years. We then proceeded to provide integration to smaller contractors by integrating Sage 100 Contractor and Procore. We learned from these integrations and will apply these learnings in our Sage Intacct construction integration scheduled for release later this year. Let's take a closer look at the Sage Procore integration. The Sage integrations between Sage and Procore really cover a lot of the different objects within our two systems. You'll notice on the left in the orange column are different components of the Procore system, and on the right in the green column are different components of the Sage systems. All three of the Sage systems are really configured quite closely and resemble each other quite a bit. Thus, the integrations that we are building out, as I mentioned earlier, we're learning upon each one of them. Some of the touch points include jobs, including cost codes and cost types are pushed back and forth. The whole concept of sub-job, phases, sub-project, extras, all those go back and forth. AP vendors, we don't have to set up vendors in both spots. We just set it up in one and they flow back and forth. Budgets and estimates flow between the systems. Then as we get into more of the transactional data like subcontracts and purchase orders and change orders, those typically are captured and entered in Procore and then flow down to the Sage systems. But as a result of cost that is also accumulated in the ERP and the accounting systems of Sage 300, 100, and Intacct, that cost needs to make its way back up to Procore for the project manager, and the project team has a visibility into the cost, and thus our costs flow back up into Procore. Sage Intacct Construction was introduced to the market at ConExpo this past March. We took 45 years of experience in the construction market and coupled that with an industry-leading cloud-native ERP solution called Sage Intacct. The melding of forces is Sage Intacct Construction.
1.
As a contractor, you know the importance of the strong foundation to the success of your project. We view the same thing at Intacct. We needed to build a strong foundation for Sage Intacct Construction to be successful. That strong foundation allows us to build simple KPIs around your project profit margins, your profit margin percentages. These all lead to the ability for us to analyze your project profitability. This simple graphic here shows, a simple P&L by project showing, the different types of cost on the project, your cost types, compared to your revenue and your project margin. We also need to sometimes spin this data and look at it from a different perspective. For example, customer. Okay, many times you might do repeat work for a common customer. Are you doing well with that customer compared to others? By taking the projects and basically respinning them to present by customer allows you to do that analysis, maybe resulting in a customer that maybe you don't want to bid on the next time. So with that, we also, as we look at the project, and again, the project overview provides a way to just look at the different types of numbers that are accumulated and kept and updated daily within the Intact Construction solution. Many of these numbers are results of integration with Procore. Starting with contract amount, your schedule of values with your upstream owner partner, that can be captured in Procore and then sent down and loaded into Intact. Project estimates, the same way. They will be able to flow from Intact up or down, either way. Project modifications, project estimate mods up in the budget sheets in Procore can flow down. As we look at commitments, purchase orders, and subcontracts, those are typically captured in by the operations team and then integrated down into Sage Intact. Total bill, total cost are an accumulation of billings and actual cost against the project. We need to make sure that those are visible to the project members up through the Procore integration. So that is a real quick highlight of some of the data that we integrate. But in addition to that, the cost overview is a much more traditional view. We could look at the job, its divisions, its cost codes. This should look very, very similar to what you see in Procore in the project budget sheets. So again, this just illustrates that we've got all this data and we could look at it and analyze it and collect it from many different perspectives.
Well, thank you, Dennis, for the great overview of Sage Intact and Procore and just the Sage Procore relationship in general. So Chris, bring us home. Help us understand data and construction. What should we take from this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an immense amount of power in data, and it's not just for you as an individual or you as a company, but it really provides a lot of insight and a lot of value to your teams as well. So when we look at it from a company level, it really helps drive three things, right? It helps us have a deeper understanding of what's happening across projects, across tools, across our financials, across our systems, as Dennis mentioned previously. That allows us to take action, right? It helps us understand who to work with, what policies and procedures we might need to be put in place in order to make corrections, how do we identify hidden trends in those large data sets so that we can go ahead and drive action on how to change our business and improve our business. And then lastly, it helps us drive that accountability. It really helps us track progress, evaluate performance, truly understand where our projects stand, where our team members are contributing, where they're maybe not contributing, and how it is that we can drive the accountability to make sure that all the tasks and all the work that needs to get done is getting completed. Now, the second part of that is really the power that that data can provide to the industry, right? And that starts with similarly deepening our understanding of what's happening across companies across the world. Really, it helps us understand what's happening in our region, what's happening potentially in our segment. And you saw some examples of this in the COVID-19 data. But you could also see examples of it as we present data around what's average response times to RFIs and punch lists. You could think of things and dream things up around square footage costs. It really helps us understand as we can accumulate this data across an entire industry and not just inside of one company. Secondly, it helps us measure performance. It helps us compare ourselves to others in the industry. It really gives us insight into how are we compared to our competitors? How are we compared to our friends? Are we doing a good job in this area of the project or in this type of management? And by having that data available to the whole industry, we can better compare ourselves to others and measure our performance. And then lastly, it really helps us drive innovation. Aggregating that data provides opportunities for the industry to innovate and improve beyond just one single company. It allows us to work with the insurance industry, for us to work with safety organizations to really help drive safer job sites, more profitable projects, and a more profitable industry altogether. So there's just so much power that's available from the data, not just for your company or for individuals at a project, but also for the industry as a whole if we start to tap into it and really start to harness it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. What a great summary. And thank you for your time today. Thank you to Dennis Stacekel as well. We did run a little bit long, so we're going to move to just tackling the question and answer session offline. So those of you that have submitted questions, we've seen some good ones. We'll go ahead and answer those via email. So thank you very much for your interest, and appreciate you all joining us today. Hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.